We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Jedi Weller. I'm the founder of OpenForge and also the host for the Startup Junto meetup here in Philadelphia. And yeah, we're super excited. Thank you all for joining today. It's a beautiful day outside, and I know everyone could be on their lunch break, walking around. So I appreciate you being in here. If you're tuning in live, then that's great. Please participate throughout the entire presentation. I'm going to be handling Q&A while Claudio is presenting. We're going to introduce Claudio in a second here. And if you can't stay for the entire meeting, no worries. We're going to actually post this on YouTube afterwards as well. So we'll make sure to be able to get all the information for you. So a couple quick things before we start and before we begin today. One of the most important things is, we all know what's going on with coronavirus, right? And I just want to say, please be safe. We appreciate you tuning in today, but, if you do, need anything, if you have any questions, right, anything at all, we're actually having an event next week as part of the Startup Junto. It's going to be on Tuesday, March 31st. Which is just going to be about adjusting your business to remote strategies, right? How do you basically compensate for, changing up the work environment, both personal and professionally, right? Because a lot of people are having difficulties, adjusting to, being at home all the time. So we want to talk about that, right? And we want to provide a way for you guys to talk about it. So please tune in. And without further ado, Claudio, I think it's time to introduce you. So Claudio has been with us, Claudio Deval, he's been with us for about 4 years now. He's an amazing consultant, amazing developer, and has worked with a lot of customers at OpenForge on progressive web apps and on some of the business aspects of PWAs. So without me saying anything else, I'm going to turn up my video here and make you the main presenter, Claudio. And yeah, it's all yours.
All right, we'll take it from here. Let me begin by sharing my screen, and Jedi, let me know if it's in the right screen. Is that a yes? Yes?
Yep, it looks like it.
All right, well, and then without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Again, thanks everyone for coming in today to my talk. Like I was saying in the beginning, PWAs has been it's a topic that I've been wanting to talk for a while. I think it's something that's really starting to become prevalent without a lot of people exactly knowing what they are. It's a very exciting piece of technology. It's emerging, it's new, it's developing currently. I'm eager to see how it evolves. And I think it's very important for both developers and business owners to understand them and recognize the opportunities that they present. Yeah, so let's thank our sponsors here, the coronavirus, for making this webinar, as originally it was planned to be a live talk. But we got to stay safe, we got to socially distance and hope that this thing is over soon. So let's go over what we're going to learn today. We're going to learn 4 simple things. We're going to learn what PWAs are. We're going to take a look at some key performance indicators that PWAs can directly improve. And then near the end, we're going to learn how to create a PWA with Ionic. And last, we're going to learn how to make an existing app into a PWA. And we're going to cover this in 3 sections. We're going to start with a big intro on PWAs. What they are, and I'm sure that some of the attendees are already familiar with PWAs, so we're going to cover some basic stuff, but hang on till the end and there'll be more specifically about the technicality around PWAs. Next, we're going to talk about why they matter for the user, why they matter for you as a business owner. And last, we're going to go over how Ionic can help you build PWAs. So, as I mentioned, at the end, we're going to have some bonus content regarding service workers and the web app manifest. And like I said, if you already know what they are, then hang on until the end and we'll cover some more specific stuff. And if you don't know, don't worry, we're going to cover these in just a bit. And yeah, let's get started. So, PWAs. Let's start with basics. PWA stands for Progressive Web App. to progressive web application. Let's address the first question that you might have. What is a web app? Now, this might sound basic, but this is actually that even I had to look up when I was researching. It's crazy how fast terminology changes, and it's actually caused some issues in the past with not differentiating properly between a web app, a native web app, or just an application in general. So I think it's important that we cover the basics and understand what we mean when we talk about these terms. So here, I'm showing you the time.gov website. I use this website regularly to check the official US time. I use it to synchronize my watch so that I'm right on the dot every second. And as you can see, there's not much going on. I mean, they have the time, and it's essentially just displaying information, just doing really well. And this is a website. Now, let's go over to Google Maps. You go to Google Maps the same way that you would go to any other website. You type in a URL into your URL bar, and you get brought up here. And the main difference that you might notice from the previous website is that there's a lot more to do while you're on here. It's a full featured application. There's functionality exposed to the user. You get to search for directions, go to Street View and whatnot. So that is essentially the main differentiating factor between a website and a web application. So I just think it's important to keep that in mind as we go on. Next, now that we've answered what is a web application, now let's talk about the progressive part. Well, let's talk about what makes a web app progressive. And let me give you a definition of what a PWA actually is. So in essence, it's a web application developed using specific technologies conforming to certain standards that allow you to use web and native app features. Let's talk about that last part of the definition, the web app features. As you saw from the title of the talk, this is all about harnessing the web. But what exactly is the web? So the web is a term that encompasses many things. It encompasses open source code, standards, concepts like free expression and digital inclusion. And it's important to mention this because when you're relying on functionality that is coming from the web, it's important to understand the collaboration that goes into maintaining these standards, the broad technology that uses these standards, and why that matters for you as a business. Because when you're releasing a product, you want to make sure that the technologies you're using have been tested and developed with a high sense of detail and testing to make sure that everything is reliable for your users. So when I talk about the web, I want to make sure that you guys know that this is something bigger, and it's actually going to confer a direct business advantage by having the product that you build be backed up by a very powerful and very involved resource, because it is a public resource, the web. So the web is maintained by a lot of organizations. One of them is the Mozilla, like the Firefox organization. And one of the great things they do is they publish documentation on some of the web APIs that the web as a platform offers. So if you're not entirely sure what an API is, it's essentially an application package interface. And it's like a contract that lets you know with what inputs you can get, what outputs you can get based on what inputs you provide. So the web offers all these great APIs, and the ones that I'm going to show are just the tip of the iceberg here. But you have APIs such as audio, which lets you play back audio and modify it. You have speech, which is a really exciting one. It's speech to text and text to speech. I think there's a lot of opportunity around just that API alone. You have others a little more obscure, such as vibration, which lets you target your devices vibration capabilities. I haven't used that one myself, but I want to check it out at some point. Then you have others such as Bluetooth, which might seem a little strange. At least for me personally, I haven't seen a web app that that leverages this functionality yet, but it's good to know that it's available and that the web offers you that capability. And this last one right here, I think is one of the more prevalent, especially for businesses, because it deals with payment. This is something that you might have seen if you use some of the more popular applications. For example, Uber Eats. If you notice that the payment processing page, it looks, at least on Android, it looks like something native to the browser. It looks like something that pops up. It remembers your saved payment details, and it processes it all. And that entire experience is possible through the web payment API in most cases. So this is something that is entirely handled by the web, and you don't have to build the look and feel and the flow of that experience. So we've talked about the web, but now let's go back and let's see what makes a web application progressive. So in order for your web app to be considered a progressive web app, it has to fulfill certain requirements. We can call them principles, I guess. And it's actually rated on a scale of how much of a PWA your app is. And let's go over some of these items on the checklist. So the first is that your web app should be discoverable. And what this means is that the contents on your app should be they should be available, or they can be found through search engines, which means that they can index the content of your app. And it also means that you can take advantage of SEO in order to rank higher on the search results. The next item on the PWA checklist is that it should be linkable. This is simply states that your web app should be accessible through a URL. And as we'll talk about more later, this is actually going to be one of the more important advantages that PWAs confer in terms of reachability and making sure that more users get access faster to your application. The next item is that your web app should be network independent. What this means is that your application is able to work offline or with poor or unreliable network conditions. And this, I think, is going to be some of the first really differentiating factors between a traditional web app and a progressive web application. In the past, we were used to using web apps, but only in the context of the browser, and obviously with an active internet connection. So leveraging offline capabilities is something that I think is going to bring a lot of value to your application. And a lot of users are already expecting this from the applications that they use. So we're going to talk about that later and how you can leverage that. The next is that your progressive web application should be progressive. And what that means is that your web application, the target is that you want to be able to reach as many users as possible. And some users are not going to have the latest browsers. They're not going to have super powerful, they're not going to have the latest technology, is what I want to say. And what it means to make your web app progressive is that at a basic level, your web app should function on all devices, or as most devices as possible. And if you're using the latest browsers and devices, then it should work to its fullest capabilities. So that's what it means for your web app to be progressive. The next item is that your web app should be re-engageable, bringing users back to your application. And historically, that has been one of the greatest challenges with web applications, is how to bring users back without them knowing without them having or needing something immediately that requires them to check out your application, but rather you engaging them and bringing them back into the app. And this essentially means that your web application should be able to receive push notifications. Next is that your web application should be responsive. And this means that your web application should work on any screen that your users are using. Whether you're using it from a mobile phone, a smartphone, or a bigger screen such as a tablet or a desktop or a laptop. Your web application should be able to function and adapt depending on what screen it's on. And it's important to know that this is all coming from the same application. This is the same application adapting to different viewports. It's not a user visits from a phone, so we're going to serve them the mobile version, or users visiting from desktop, so we're going to serve them the desktop application. This is the same application adapting, and that's what it means for it to be responsive. The next item on the checklist is that it should be safe, and this essentially means that the connection between you, between the user and the app, needs to be secured against any third parties trying to get access to sensitive data that is transmitted across. And this, for people that know, is essentially making sure that your app is being served through HTTPS, which is the secure way to transmit data using that protocol. And last but not least is that your progressive web app should be installable. Now, this is going to be a main talking point today, because one of the biggest limitations with web applications in the past is that users were only able to add a web application as a bookmark, and then what they would be able to do originally is to essentially add a shortcut to their home screen that would bring them back to your web application. Now, this is actually much different than that, and it's more akin to installing like native applications. It's actually installing your application in the user's device so that your application can leverage some of the native functionalities, such as background sync, offline usage, and push notifications. So I think it's important to make this differentiation, because oftentimes users don't really know the difference, or they can't tell the difference. But this is one of the challenges that I'm going to show you at the end how to mitigate and work against. So we've covered what makes PWA a PWA, the items that you got to check off in order for your web application to be considered a progressive web app. Now, let's talk about the two key pieces of technology that make PWAs possible. So the first is the service worker. The service worker is a script that's running separate from your app. So it's running in the browser, and it's responsible for some of the features that we've talked about, such as background sync, enabling offline capabilities, and receiving push notifications. Now, there's more than that can be done through service workers, and we'll talk about that at the end of the talk. Next, the other piece of technology that makes PWAs possible is the web app manifest. The web app manifest, like the name suggests, is a declaration that essentially tells your browser how to handle your PWA. It contains specifications such as the name of your progressive web app, what's the title that's going to be displayed across the tab, a short description of your PWA, the icon that will be used once users install your app, and other things such as the color of your splash screen and the mode in which your PWA is being viewed. So one option would be like full screen versus like a minimal UI that still shows the URL bar. So all of that is customizable through the web app manifest. Right. So now we've essentially covered all about the PWAs. We've covered the intro. Now we're going to get into what I think most of you came here for, is how does this affect my business plan? So in order to answer that question, I'm going to show you some actual companies who have adopted PWAs, and I'll just let the numbers speak for themselves. We're going to start with Tinder. So back in 2017, Tinder released their PWA called Tinder Online, and this is how they did. These stats are provided by PWA Stats. If you go, you'll see a bunch of stats underscoring success stories that some companies have had with PWAs. And as you can see here on this one, you'll see that Tinder was able to cut the loading time from 11.91 seconds to 4.69 seconds. Additionally, they were able to reduce the original size of their application by 90%. Which I know in the past users were concerned about the size of the applications, but I think nowadays with some of the smartphones that are coming out, that's not necessarily going to be a major concern to them, or they might not notice that, but it is going to affect the loading time, and it's going to improve that greatly. So before moving on, let's talk about that first stat. So it's almost 12 seconds to 4.5 seconds. That might not seem like a big difference, but let me show you why it is. So this book on screen right now is one of my favorite books. I recommend it to almost everyone. And it covers topics such as the subconscious and how rational we are when making decisions. And spoiler alert, it's not a lot. It's not even close to what we think of ourselves as sentient volitional beings making these decisions. It's not at all how that works. So here's why I mention it. Let's say you put in all this work into an app, and after a user installs your app, which congratulations, by the way, that is a big, big, big step, as we're going to talk about later. But let's say that the user has downloaded your app, and now they open it, and they see something like this for 10 seconds, let's say. Now you might think, well, no biggie. Put all this effort into this app. The app is working to get whatever resources it needs in order to provide the functionality that we've designed for the user. So whatever, they should be grateful they're getting the functionality, and it's no biggie, they're just waiting. That's not the case. So as you'll see here in this graph, which was compiled by Google by training a neural network using a large data set based on conversion rates and loading times, you'll see that the difference in probability of users bouncing away from your app dramatically increases with just a couple difference in seconds. So from Google says that the ideal time is around 3 seconds. And you'll see that even if you start deviating just 1 or 2 seconds away from that, just the difference in the jump of the probability is already staggering. So it does matter greatly. Loading times and other UX aspects that you might see as unimportant actually do matter a lot. And the book that I mentioned earlier tells you how those things, they inform your notion or your sentiment towards not just the app itself, but the company that's providing it. It tells the user, like, not consciously, but it's in the back of their mind and their subconscious, it's saying, look at this app, it's taking a while to load, the font is not that great, it's hard to read. You're essentially introducing a friction that subconsciously turns your users away from the app and also away from the company. So one of the things that I talked about earlier is that your bundle size is going to be decreased, and your engagement is going to also go up. You can see this in the case of Twitter Lite, which is a PWA version that launched in 2017. They saw a 65% increase in pages per session, 75% increase in tweets, and a 20% decrease in their bounce rate. So you might think, well, sure, that's great, but Twitter is a special case. Twitter users, they essentially have no choice when they want to use the app. They have to use Twitter. They want to tweet, they're going to use Twitter. But it's a lot different when you're providing a service that a lot of other companies are providing, say, for example, food delivery. This should make it evident how important it is to not turn your users away, because the users know that there's going to be other options out there. And if small things like the loading time or any other like UX superficial aspects are going to turn them away, they know there's another solution out there that they can use, and it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to try. So we cover speed a lot, and speed is a very important factor. We see the business benefit for it. We see that in the increased key performance indicators that we saw, but I want to drive home a broader point, and that is the success that we see from improving metrics such as speed actually revolve around the concept of improving the user experience. That is something that I think is very important for web developers and business owners to keep in mind, because the benefits that we might derive or we might see coming in from adopting these technologies, it's not just about reducing certain numbers or improving the formula so that you get higher performance. It's about keeping in mind that the work you're putting in when you're thinking about functionality you're providing to your user, that you want to keep in, you want to aim to improve the experience of your users. And the biggest lesson or takeaway I think from here is that making apps is not just about delivering functionality, but it's about doing so while providing a good user experience. Next up, we're going to show you another great book that I would recommend, specifically if you're building a website or an app. This book talks about web usability and about improving the user experience. But the biggest lesson, which is in the cover of the book, is don't make me think. And as we continue to work with user experience specifically, you might start noticing that we're working with a very limited attention budget from users, and we're working with a very low threshold of mental friction, or cognitive load is the term that is used in the other book. So what I want to say is you, at some point or another, while using your application, your users are going to start to question, is this even worth it? As I'm doing this, all this work at every step, is it even worth continuing? Should I just try something else? I guarantee you that they're going to ask that if they're using your app, and they'll turn away to another. But what if they don't even make it to your app? Following, let me introduce to you what I think is the biggest barrier in apps in our time, or hurdle, I should say. So the big install hurdle. At first glance, it doesn't seem like an unreasonable flow, perhaps. I mean, you have a lot of websites that act as a landing page, which describe the functionalities of an app, the offerings, and then you link users to the App Store and have them download the app. Other times, which I personally do not like, are when I get the impression that I'm going to be able to use a service or an app, and then in order to continue, they bring me to the App Store. Now, I can't stress how quickly that turns me away, and many users as well, I would imagine, to download another app. To drive this point even further, I want you to guess how many apps an average smartphone user downloads per month. So, big drum roll, the number is 0. Now, how is that even possible, you might ask? People are still publishing apps on the App Store with the hopes that they're eventually going to gain a user base, but with stats like this, that prospect does not seem too possible. So the reason for this metric is that on average, most users spend 80% of the time in their top 3 apps that they've already downloaded and installed, which means that they're not looking for other apps that they're going to install. We talked about installing as a big factor that makes the success behind PWAs. This can be reflected by Trivago. Trivago here saw an increase of 150% for people who added the PWA to the home screen. And it also increased engagement, and people that went offline and were browsing, they were able to continue using the website because of PWAs and their offline capabilities. So let's take a look at what this install experience looks like. It looks like this. So if you visit a PWA, which the Washington Post is a PWA, eventually you'll get this little banner at the bottom. And with this little banner, there's a big discussion ongoing, and there's a lot of work going into this particular functionality. So for example, traditionally, this little banner will pop up after you interact with the website a little bit. There's a low threshold for user engagement, after which the browser automatically presents the user with this banner. And like we said before, pressing this banner is actually installing your application into the device. You're not adding a bookmark or a shortcut, it's the actual application. PWAs give you the option to customize this experience. So let's say, for example, you have a web commerce application, and after a user completes their purchase, you want to re-engage them and bring them back to the app. So what you can do then is have this modal be visible after they've completed that interaction. You also have the ability to track these events as conversion for people that actually get shown this modal and press it and go through with the installation. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more at the end on this specifically. But now I wanted to move on to a subject that we've been sort of skirting around. But the point for making PWAs installable is that you don't have to go through an app store. And Max Lynch from Ionic published a blog last year that talks about why you should think about building to PWA first and then going mobile in the future. Traditionally, a lot of teams in the past have invested most of their budget on releasing a native mobile application that can be deployed on an app store and found in an app store. But Max makes 2 great points in his blog, which I recommend everyone to read. So I'm going to be going over those next. The first is that app stores are incredibly saturated. As you'll see here, there's more than 2 million apps on the App Store right now. I actually remember when Apple reached its million mark, which at the time I was like, wow, that means that people are coming up with apps. There's enough for everything. But now with another million, now it's making me think more along the lines of, geez, 2 million apps. I mean, how many of them are actually great, you know? So yeah, so that's one point. It's they're saturated. And in order for your app to succeed in a saturated environment such as the app stores, then that's gonna take a lot of money. A lot of money for advertisement that a lot of startups and a lot of teams don't have. And it takes away from a budget that could otherwise be used to improve the user experience. The other part about being on the App Store is that you can't leverage web traffic. Some of you out there might be familiar with SEO, and there's actually a counterpart for the App Store, which is ASO, App Store Optimization. From what I've learned is that SEO is a bit more understood recently than ASO, and usually more often than not, users are going to be they're going to be searching through on search engines rather than going directly to the App Store and searching for an app. Unless they know the name of the app and look for it directly, I find it very hard to believe that someone's going to go and put in a description on the App Store to find an app. That also means that not only do you have to pay for advertising, but you also have to place your app in the right category in order to improve your chances of being discovered. So that is another part where PWAs and web technology can come to the rescue. Now, in this past slide, I showed you the checklist that your PWA needs to have in order to be considered a PWA. And these two first principles are, I think, the ones that are going to let you take advantage of web traffic by improving SEO. Like I said before, since you're building your PWA with web technologies, that means that your app is able to be, the content of your app is able to be indexed by search engines. And I take it that, yes, the App Store, I mean, the user's home screen is a coveted place for you to get, but I think one that's even more valuable is the top rank in the search results. So by building a PWA, you'll be able to leverage the different techniques that people use in order to improve their SEO. The other one, the second one, is that they're linkable, lets you take advantage of a very low friction interaction where someone who already has your PWA and wants to share it, just by showing the link, people who click on that are brought directly to the PWA, not to an App Store listing, which then prompts them to download it. The point is that you want to put your app in front of the user as fast as possible, and that's being linkable is something that makes this possible for PWAs. Now that's the end of this section, and let me take a sip here. So far, I've talked about why PWAs are great, but the reality is that there are some caveats. So the first one, the big elephant in the room for those who know about PWAs is iOS support. So a little bit of history. I think actually Apple was the pioneer in this technology, and I believe they didn't call them PWAs, but the concept was essentially the same. And now for many reasons, namely the fact that they have an app store, an app store system that they want all the apps to go through it. So you can see why they don't want people to be able to publish apps directly without going through them. The other one is that there are some native exclusive features that aren't available to PWAs yet. One of them would be if you want to provide biometric authentication in your app. Another one off the top of my head is that PWAs currently don't have access to the user's calendar, which is a pretty powerful feature in my opinion. The other caveat or factor when choosing between PWAs and native is the aspect of familiarity. Now, I'm sure that many of you either have seen that little install banner that I showed and have either dismissed it or just shrugged and wonder, well, what the hell is this? And this is because there is an aspect of familiarity attached to native applications. From the beginning of the time when smartphones began getting more popular, that has always been the model for updating new applications, is going through the App Store. And I think it's important to recognize that there is some value in that aspect. But what if I told you that you don't necessarily have to choose? Why don't we have both a PWA and a native application? So at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that I was going to show you how Ionic might help. And this is perhaps the biggest advantage that you have when using Ionic, is that from the same code base, you're able to maintain essentially four different products. You have iOS, Android, web, and even desktop if you want, all from the same code base. I mean, that's going to reduce development costs a lot, and also maintenance. And not even that, yes, you're going to be reducing costs, but you're also going to be delivering the same quality and as close to the similar experience that users expect, no matter what platform they're accessing your PWA. So I think that's a huge advantage and something to consider when choosing Ionic. But let me talk a little bit about how this works. So I talked about web features and I talked about native features. And to put it simply, you need to be able to target the implementation of the platform that you're currently running on. And you need something to manage that. You need a sort of bridge. And one of the solutions that Ionic provides is Capacitor. Wrong logo. Sorry, I had to put that in there. Capacitor. So capacitor, just in short, is the bridge that I was talking about. It's a runtime container for your web application. And if it's running on the web, it's going to target the web capabilities. If it's running on iOS or Android, it's going to target those directly. But the advantage with using capacitor is that more often than not, by writing the same implementation, your app, when it's running on the targeted platform, it automatically chooses the right implementation for that. So that also cuts down on your development costs. So yeah, that is one of the biggest considerations to keep in mind when choosing Ionic to build PWAs. And we're almost at the end of the talk. But at the beginning, I mentioned that you were going to learn four things. You were going to learn what PWAs are. You were going to learn the key performance indicators that PWAs can improve. And then you were also going to learn how to build a PWA with Ionic and make an existing application into a PWA. Now, the reason why you haven't gotten this already, and we're almost at the end of the talk, is that it's extremely easy. With this command, single command, you're able to build an entire PWA using Ionic and Stencil, which is Ionic's web component compiler. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I will say that I used Stencil to build my website, and essentially from the moment I switched to Stencil as a PWA, I got really, really, really high scoring marks on Lighthouse, which is a tool that assesses the level of, or the score of your PWA. And I was getting really, really high results from just using that. This is possible through something called the Pw8 Toolkit, which Ionic offers. And after running that command, you're going to be creating a clone of that toolkit. And from the get-go, it's already going to be pre-configured to be able to do some of the things that you see on screen, such as the push notifications. It's going to be ready for running unit tests. It's going to be using the latest and best practices by default, all without doing nothing. And actually, one of the capabilities that I haven't actually talked on on the right of the screen at the top of the last column, update toasts. That is something that lets your user know if there has been an update to the web application they're using. And sometimes they'll have modes where either the app can update itself or they can wait, alert the user that there's a new version, and by pressing, it'll update. So that's one of the great functionalities of a PWA. And last, similarly as creating a new PWA, if you have an existing project using Angular, all it takes to add a service worker and a web app manifest is running one simple command. So the last offering that I want to talk from Ionic is AppFlow. AppFlow, if you do choose to go the both PWA and native approach, or even more than that, web native desktop, it allows you to manage your application from a centralized hub, which can be hooked up to your continuous integration and continuous delivery process, which for those of you who are not familiar, it's the system by which the development process is organized in stages through which automation takes place in order to build the resources that the app needs, and in some cases to automatically deploy these apps automatically through their respective environments, whether it be web or outputting a native binary that can be uploaded to the App Store. And I've been hearing, I've seen on Twitter that Ionic plans to have you be able to deploy directly to the App Store from AppFlow. And that is something that I'm definitely looking forward. So to conclude here, we've learned what PWAs are, which is a web application built with specific technologies conforming to certain standards that allow you to target web and native app functionality. We also learned that PWAs can improve key performance indicators such as loading times, can reduce bounce rates, and improve conversion rates. And as we just saw, all it takes is one command to create a PWA with Ionic, or turn an existing Angular app into a PWA. So yeah, all of this information that I showed you is available on the web. It's available on Ionic's website. They have a lot of resources on PWAs and why you should build PWAs. But one thing that I wanted to add here is my personal testimonial. Throughout my time at OpenForge, we've always used Ionic, and it's been great to use them because I think they really listen to the community, which is really active. But most importantly, they know that building apps is all about improving your users' experience. And with that, I thank you all for coming.
Audio. That was definitely really amazing. And we had a couple questions actually from the audience. So as I'm going through a couple of these, if anyone else has any other questions, please let me know. Also, you're more than welcome to pop on video. You know, if you're, hating this current social isolation out there and you want to just, wave hi, feel free. So Claudio, so one of the questions was in terms of installation. So for the PW checklist, when you said installable, are you talking about installation with Safari browser?
So I touched upon that. The iOS experience is not the same as it is on Android. What I showed you was what it looks like on Android, where you see the little banner that pops up at the bottom with the add to home screen. But on iOS, in Safari, what you actually have to do is go through the flow of adding it as a bookmark. It's almost the same flow as it used to be, but what you're actually doing is installing the PWA. And I know that it doesn't make it evident and it doesn't communicate to users that they're actually installing the PWA. So that's certainly one of the challenges that we face is when building PWAs.
Okay, cool. Another question we got here from Matt Neckow is what are the major challenges you've encountered in the wild with progressive web apps?
In the wild.
In the wild.
Oof. Well, the install is one. When I was making the slides, I was actually trying to trigger the install banner, and I found it kind of hard to do that reliably. Sometimes they would pop up immediately, and then after coming on once, they would never show again. Another challenge is managing the service worker. So the service worker is something that users are definitely not going to be aware of. But if you have different versions of your site, or if you have updated your site, it sometimes won't automatically update. And that obviously, if you're trying to bring an important update to your site or app and your users don't get to see that, then that's obviously going to bring some problems. So I think that's probably the main issue that I've run in with PWAs.
Okay, awesome. And then we had a question, a two-part question from Jordan Gaiman here. So I've seen an install button in Chrome Omnibar. Is this for installing PWAs on desktop? And I don't know if, oh, go ahead.
Yes. If you're on desktop, you'll see a little plus mark on the Omnibar, and that is what that's doing. It's the install for PWA on desktop.
Okay, and then his second part of the question was, is it just as easy to convert React apps to progressive web apps?
Yes, yes. So something that we didn't touch upon is that Ionic has broad support for React, and I'm not entirely sure if it's the same process as with an Angular, where you just have to add, run that one command. I'm not a big React user, but I think that it can't be that much difficult. It's essentially adding the service worker and the web app manager. So if you know how to generate those two files, you can do it.
Cool. And Jordan says, nice and thanks. Eli Lucas said a couple things here. First was a wave and clap emoji that didn't come through, so he had to explain it out for me as a question. So that's a wave and a clap for you, Claudio. And he also had a question. Is there a service worker library helper you've checked out or recommend?
Yes, that is actually the bonus content that I have here, which we can look at after we're done with the questions.
Cool. Okay. Do you want to pull that up right now, actually?
Yeah. It's called the Serviceworker Cookbook. Replace. No, I don't want to do that. Copy. Open. Boom. Yeah. So this essentially has recipes on some of the things that are possible through the service worker, different caching strategies, different ways to do push notifications and offline capability.
Awesome. And I just, I think I copied that URL correctly. Let me see here. Yep, beautiful. So I just posted that in the chat for everyone.
And we'll have it. We'll publish the slides, and if they have access to them, they'll have all these links here in this slide.
Okay. What kind of projects are you working on right now, Claudio? That's PWAs.
So I have a weird affinity towards geolocation and towards what I call like anti-social media. I haven't made any of these projects public. They're mainly just experiments that I have. But anything having to do with geolocation or having a social, a different aspect of social network. I actually forked an instance of Mastodon, which I highly doubt that anyone's going to know what it is, but it's essentially a tool that allows you to run your own social network. And with geolocation, I've looked at things like pod maps is a great example. It's a PWA that shows you different podcasts around the world. Let me see if I can actually pull it up. And this is actually, it served as inspiration for me in wanting to use geolocation pod maps. Okay. No? podcast, math, PWA. Well, maybe not. But yeah, that's sort of the projects that I'm interested in right now.
Cool. All right, and we have from an anonymous participant, any recommendation towards including libraries with PWA? Example, phaser-gaming or any custom library that can sit in browser until called for.
Any recommendation for adding them? Maybe not for adding them, but I think the tip that I would give is be aware of the boundaries. So be aware of what's handled by the service worker, the web app manifest, which is not a lot when it comes to actually running the PWA, but all those libraries that you mentioned, that's working with another set of the web technology. So be aware of what might cross over into the PWA barrier, whether it be special caching strategies or loading resources from the web that your library might need. That's something that you might be able to leverage with the service worker, because it essentially can act as a proxy for outgoing and incoming calls from the network. So just keep in mind where the boundaries are and what might involve these technologies.
And I just want to give a shout out to one of our attendees whose name is Dummy, parentheses, stay at home. That's awesome. Well, this is the perfect time for webinars, right? Okay, so, and then I think the second part of that question was related to Phaser and gaming, and I know we're working on Startup Wars right now, which is a game. So, like, what's your experience been? Can you just talk about that? You know, combining Phaser and Ionic project.
Yes. So I've built, as you know, we've built a mobile game before in the Corona SDK, and that was all done with that SDK. But in this case, integrating Phaser into an Ionic app was a brand new thing for us, and it's worked out wonderfully. I gotta say, it essentially is having an Ionic application, and then all your Phaser stuff can be contained in one view. And if you contain it all in one view, you're still able to use services using dependency injection from Angular. And you can also communicate with the main instance of Phaser, which is awesome because it's all we need. We need certain things to run in Phaser, and we need certain views to be the Ionic pages. And from what we've seen, we've had great success doing that approach, separating Phaser into its own container and then the rest of the Ionic application acting as normal.
Awesome. And I'm just sending a link here next week. And Denise says, thank you for this. This is very helpful. All right, so I think that concludes it. We are right on time with 1 minute. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one more thing.
yeah, go for it, go for it.
So in the slide, I have the different pages from the Serviceworker Cookbook. If you check it out, you have small options for caching strategies. I'll just quickly talk about them and you can check them out later. But you have options to provide to try the network first, fetch your whatever resources you need, and then fall back on the cache. Or if you want to provide an even faster experience, provide the offline content first and then update as needed. Similarly, you have different capabilities with push notifications. You have the ability to send payloads, which can be text, for example. And then you also have the ability to receive what they call rich push notifications, which allow you to define vibration patterns. What else does? You can also add an image to associate the notification, and then other parameters such as actions that can be activated from the notification. And lastly, on the Serviceworker Cookbook, they have this interesting recipe on doing API analytics. A lot of times when using analytics, you will get standard usage statistics provided by whatever analytics solution you're using. But with this recipe, you're allowed to implement at the service worker level your own way of tracking API usage. Like I said, the service worker can act as a proxy between incoming calls. So you might be able to do more sophisticated measures of tracking your API usage. And then the very, very last thing is about the service worker. The web app manifest. So the install experience that we touched upon briefly, so that can be actually customized. And I touched upon briefly on doing it differently than default, which is after interacting with the website being shown the install banner, you can actually choose when the banner is displayed as long as it's prompted by a user action. And then additionally, Justin Willis, which some of you might follow on Twitter, has a great solution from Pw8 Builder Suite, and it's a web component called Pw8 Install. And what this does is it uses the web app manifest to create an app store-like experience for installing PWAs. And I think this is something that's going to bridge the gap in knowledge from users that are not familiar with PWAs, and it'll provide them something more familiar that they can recognize and would feel better interacting with. So yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Cool. All right, I'm good now, right?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Claudio, and thanks so much for everyone else who came out. We're going to be posting this again on YouTube, so if you missed anything, we'll have all the link resources there. So we'll post them all. So please you do follow us on YouTube for OpenForge. And finally, we do have the link that I posted out for our meeting next week. It's going to be a little bit different. This is a webinar, right? But next week on Tuesday, we're going to be having a meeting in which everyone's going to be able to have their video on and talk and and just communicate about working from home during the coronavirus times. So with that said, thanks everyone again. We appreciate you. Follow up with any questions, and we will see you later.
Thanks, guys.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. If you have any comments, if you have any content that you would like us to post, or if you have any questions about the video, please let us know. We are here to help you. We are here to provide guidance in your startup and in your mobile application journey. So whatever it is, subscribe, comment, let us know, let us hear it. We want to hear from you. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.